Last year, well, back in October anyway, I had the pleasure of spending the day in Hamburg with my boy. Now, we were travelling back from our Scandi trip, and we had two things planned for Hamburg that day. Miniature World, all those model railways, and then St. Pauli to visit the famous locations that made the Beatles, so the Indra, the Kaiserkeller, Bambi Kino, such like. Sadly, I ran out of time, and while I promised myself to revisit the locations, I'm not sure when that's likely to happen, and so I thought I'd throw this video together to highlight how Hamburg was quite possibly where the whole story began, the place that the band honed their performance skills as musicians, as well as captivating an audience and keeping the audience attention. Before the Beatles became the most influential band in music history, I don't think there's any doubt, they were simply a group of young boys from Liverpool with dreams of making it big. They began as the Quarrymen, which was John Lennon's high school band, that ultimately would include Paul and George. They then transitioned into the Silver Beatles, performing a short stint as the backing band with Johnny Gentle in a Scotland tour. Link up here. But it was in Hamburg that they would transform into the band that we know as the Beatles. Hamburg provided their development, testing their resilience, dedication and artistry while forging connections that would shape their careers. And so I'd like to take a closer look at those circumstances. The Beatles' journey to Hamburg was orchestrated by their first manager, Alan Williams, the owner of the Jacaranda Club in Liverpool, where the Beatles would be playing. Williams had taken the band under his wing and sought opportunities to expand their exposure. He struck a deal with Bruno Koschmider, the owner of several clubs in Hamburg's notorious St. Pauli district. Now, Koschmider was looking for rock and roll acts to entertain the city's lively and eclectic nightlife. Williams arranged for the Beatles to play a series of residency gigs in Hamburg, and this was an opportunity that would push them far beyond their comfort zone. On August the 17th, 1960, John, Paul, Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best arrived in Hamburg, ready to make their mark. Remember here that while Stuart had been playing with the other three, Pete Best was recruited last minute as he had a drum kit and was persuaded to go with them to Hamburg. The Beatles knew Pete Best from the Casbah, a club where his group, the Blackjacks, were resident, and Paul called Pete and asked him if he was interested in joining the band. Paul was convinced that Pete would be suitable for the group after seeing him play at the Casbah. So Pete had an audition at Williams's Jacaranda Club on August the 15th, 1960, and the next day he travelled to Hamburg with them as a member of the group. The Beatles' first Hamburg residency then was at the Indra Club, modest venue in Große Freiheit. Their contract required them to play 48 nights, often performing long hours each evening, and this grueling schedule was both a challenge and a gift. It honed their stamina, stage presence and repertoire. They arrived early in the morning and quickly found themselves immersed in the infamous St. Pauli district. Unable to check into their accommodations, they slept on the red leather sofa seats at the Indra Club. Later they were relegated to a storeroom in the nearby Bambi Kino cinema, where conditions were, of course, far from glamorous. Now, their performances at the Indra were raw and energetic, captivating the diverse clientele of sailors, gangsters and tourists. Now, despite these challenges, this stint was pivotal in shaping their future professionalism and adaptability. Now, I've read from so many sources about this, and I question the terminology gangsters. While I think of gangsters as things like Al Capone, right? But the Oxford English Dictionary defines a gangster as a member of a gang of violent criminals. So it is highly likely that while the whole gang may not have been present at Beatles gigs, there were certainly members of gangs in the audience. So there's your gangsters. What a way to cut their teeth, right? Not only the liberation of sex for the boys, but rubbing shoulders with these characters changed them from boys to men. The Indra Club closed within 2 months of the Beatles' arrival due to noise complaints, so the Beatles were moved to the larger Kaiserkeller, which was another club owned by Koschmider. From October the 4th to November the 30th, 1960, they performed 56 nights, often sharing the stage with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, whose drummer, of course, was Ringo Starr. Now, the lads had crossed paths with Ringo while in Liverpool, because they all worked the same circuits and likely shared the same stages. But it was at the Kaiserkeller that the acquaintance was formally created. Now, on occasion, Pete Best had been unavailable to drum for their nightly gigs, so Ringo sat in. Let's remember here that while Pete Best provided a solid backbeat to the band, he had been a last-minute inclusion, and as such, the other three would likely as not have had previous experience with Pete as their drummer. Now, I often wonder if their decision to include him was just a rash impulse due to their commitment and he had a drum kit. Anyway, see this video I made about Pete Best up here, might explain a bit more. So with Ringo playing the odd set, and this got to sow the seeds for Ringo to A, replace Pete Best, and B, become a permanent member of the band. So the Kaiserkeller experience marked a turning point. With each performance, the band grew tighter, more confident, and more charismatic. The camaraderie with club bouncer Horst Fascher, who protected and befriended them, contributed to a sense of belonging that they would find in Hamburg. By April 1961, the Beatles returned to Hamburg, this time performing at the Top 10 Club. And here they played for 3 months, delivering high-energy shows aided by improved equipment, such as a PA system with reverb and echo. However, this move strained their relationship with Koschmider, who retaliated by reporting George Harrison as being underage. Perhaps he failed to mention to the police that he had previously contracted George to play, despite knowing he was underage. George was deported, followed shortly by Paul and Pete, after a minor incident at the Bambi Kino where they had been accused of arson. Now, Paul and Pete returned to the Bambi Kino to collect their belongings. The storeroom that they'd been using as the makeshift bedroom was dark, so to improvise, they attached a condom to a nail on the wall and set it alight to give off illumination. Although there was no significant damage, Bruno Koschmider, angered by the Beatles' decision to leave his club for the better paying Top 10 Club, reported the act to the police as attempted arson. This petty act of vengeance led to Paul and Pete being arrested and spending several hours in the David Vasch police station in the Reeperbahn. They were subsequently deported from Germany on December the 1st, 1960. Was Koschmider a gangster? I'm pretty sure that running the kind of establishments that he did in locations that they were, he was certainly a respected member of his community, shall we say. Well, between the Hamburg residencies of autumn 1961 and spring 1962, the Beatles continued to build their reputation and refine their craft in Liverpool and beyond. They became regular performers at the Cavern Club. The venue would become their home base and they played there almost daily, and their growing confidence and experience gained in Hamburg allowed them to captivate audiences with their energetic and polished performance. During their last Hamburg residency, mid-1961, the Beatles recorded My Bonnie with Tony Sheridan under the name The Beat Brothers. Released in October 1961, the single gained some local popularity, especially in Liverpool, when fans began requesting the single at NEMS. On November the 9th, 1961, Brian attended one of their lunchtime performances at the Cavern Club. He was impressed by their raw energy and charisma, And even though their image was still kind of rough around the edges, he saw potential in the band and offered to manage them. Could have been their tight trousers. He would then convince the band to adopt a more professional image, including matching suits and ties, which marked the beginning of their transition into a marketable act. So during the 2 Hamburg Stints, the band lineup changed too. Stuart Sutcliffe, the band's original bassist, decided to leave the Beatles permanently so that he could focus on his art and career in Hamburg with his fiancée, Astrid Kirchherr. Paul, although initially reluctant, took over the bass guitar, solidifying the lineup as John, Paul, George and Pete. Now more than ever, the band were turning into something quite special. Under Epstein's guidance, the Beatles began a series of auditions to secure a recording contract. Although Liverpool remained their base, the Beatles also performed gigs throughout the UK, building their reputation as a live act, often playing other northern towns such as Manchester, Chester and Birkenhead. This period between the Hamburg residencies was crucial for the Beatles' evolution. They transitioned from a rough, raw club band to a more polished and professional group. They had found a manager in Brian Epstein who would be instrumental in their rise to fame. The Beatles' final Hamburg residency took place at the Star Club in 1962. These performances solidified their reputation as a powerhouse live act, setting the stage for their global breakout. During their 7-week stint, they played 172 hours, refining their sound and building a loyal following. Live recordings from the Star Club captured their raw energy and wide-ranging repertoire, showcasing their growth as musicians. There's an interesting video on YouTube where Alan Williams and Teddy Taylor talk about kind of their hoping of making a few quid after finding the Star Club tapes, which were recorded on a small tape recorder. I'll put a little bit of clip here.
What's it worth?
Well, the mind boggles to what it is worth, but it's estimated if this goes out as a Beatles album, well, it could be anything, 8 million, 10 million, 20 million pounds.
The Hamburg years were not only about the performances, but also about the relationships that profoundly influenced the Beatles. Astrid Kirchherr, a young German photographer, met the band during their Kaiserkeller residency and became romantically involved with Stuart Sutcliffe. Not only taking photographs, she played a pivotal role in shaping their image, introducing the iconic mop-top hairstyle.
Stuart was the first one who said, oh, I would like to have that hairstyle. And because their hair was very long, I could do it in one night, which I did. And Stuart was the first one who performed on stage with the so-called Beatles or Klaus haircut.
Kirchherr's artistic influence and support provided the band with a new level of sophistication. Klaus Voormann, Kirchherr's former boyfriend, also formed a lasting bond with the band. A talented artist and musician, Voormann later designed the iconic cover for the Beatles' Revolver album and performed with the Plastic Ono Band. Now, I follow Klaus Voormann on Instagram, and it's just interesting to see the posts that he puts up there, especially when he's been commissioned to do reworkings of Beatles album covers, as well as other fabulous art. I'm not sure I can put a link to Instagram. If I can, it'll go up here. Otherwise, I'll put it on the screen. And so, Pete was the Beatles drummer during the early Hamburg residencies, but his reliability was sometimes called into question. There were instances when Pete Best became unavailable for performances, and on such occasions Paul McCartney, versatile and eager to keep the show going, would step in on the drums, although drumming was not his forte. This temporary shift underscored the band's show must go on ethos and their ability to adapt to challenging situations. One pivotal moment occurred when Ringo, who was performing with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, was invited to sit in for Pete Best during a Hamburg gig. The Beatles immediately noticed the difference in their sound and dynamic. Ringo's drumming was more solid, reliable, and filled with a unique sense of timing that complemented the band's evolving style. John, Paul and George reportedly remarked on how much better the band felt with Ringo on drums, planting the seed for what would later become the permanent lineup change.
So Ringo sat in, and the look on our faces was all like...
This realisation foreshadowed the eventual dismissal of Pete Best in August 1962, shortly after the band recorded their first tracks at EMI Studios. Now Ringo joined as the Beatles' full-time drummer, complementing the lineup that would take the world by storm. After the final Hamburg residency of the Star Club in 1962, they returned to Liverpool as seasoned performers, eventually securing their first recording contract with Parlophone and releasing their debut single, Love Me Do. In essence, the journey back and forth between Liverpool and Hamburg represented a transformation period for the Beatles. Each residency added layers to their artistry and stagecraft, preparing them for the challenges and triumphs of their eventual rise to global stardom. So Hamburg was where the Beatles were forged into a world-class band. The demanding schedule instilled discipline. Their interactions with eclectic audiences as well as management taught them how to engage and captivate, and the connections they made expanded their artistic horizons. The bonds and lessons from these early years would resonate throughout their careers, shaping the music and camaraderie that defined the Beatles' legacy.
Pressing this way, hot foot, many moons to temple.
Don't encourage him. You've got the part, Paul.
And with that, I will draw close to the video. Feel free to drop me a comment. As always, I'll appreciate your input and, dare I say it, corrections too. But be kind. This is just me putting a video out there on my own accord. I'm not paid to do this. The Beatles in Hamburg. I think that kind of covers it, doesn't it? Bye for now. See you in another video.